Hello, welcome to yet another late Media Monday. It's coming out on Tuesday this time, though, not Thursday. So, small victories. All right. Hope your week is starting off okay. Um, mine's a bit of a struggle, but some good progress. Got some things to work with. I hope you do as well. So, just a little quick recap. 2 Mondays ago, started off with something early in my life. Talked about Harry Potter and growing up with that. Last week was the Flow State podcast, which is something I picked up very recently. And I guess we're going to bounce back to, you know, the older days. And I was struggling to think of a topic I felt passionate about and I could speak with, flow and have a passion for, which I think are both important for recording in the moment. But I wanted to talk about growing up with the change of the internet, um, or rather, the development of the internet. Because for those younger folk, and I know most of my listeners are my friends and therefore people who also experienced it, but for the people who ever listen to this who are younger, it's in my opinion a very different and interesting time, and I'm sure the people who are older than me can appreciate this even more. Growing up without the internet, seeing the rise of the internet, and seeing how it became what it is today. I'm obviously not going to talk about everything, and you may disagree with me as to what were more important parts of the development of the internet. But these are just the things that I remember, the things that were key to me, um, and it's personal. So growing up, at least until I believe the age of 6, I didn't. I don't think I really knew what computers were, at least from my recollection. Like looking back at my memories, I don't have any memories that included computers until about the age of 6 or 7. Um, I think my first memory of a computer, or at least a personal computer, is learning how to type in the computer lab at Dave's Avenue Elementary School, which is located in Los Gatos. And it was cool. I remember, we had been to the library before, which is a really fun place. The librarian would read to us. But next to the library, there was the computer lab, and that was exciting because we had never been in there. And there are just, these rows. From what I recall, there are just a bunch of rows of desks with computers. There's an aisle down the middle. And so you got, if you walk down the middle, there's desk to your left, desk to your right. And we learned how to type. And I don't remember the software we used anymore, unfortunately. But I remember thinking one is cool, and two is really fun. They have these typing games, but three, I was picking up fairly quickly. And I'm not gonna say I was like a prodigy at typing or anything. I'm certainly not a prodigy of typing now, but I have a decent typing speed, and I haven't tested it in a while. But if I take one of those, typing tests, speed typing tests online, I usually get around somewhere between 90 and 100 words per minute. And it's not like I've specifically trained for that. I have some things that have helped that speed, which I'll get into later. But yeah, so even as a kid, it felt fun because it came easily and the software was well designed, at least for the time. And it was cool to be able to put words to, you know, your thoughts and words to a more tangible version, faster than writing, because handwriting sucks. Having done it for all these years, I'm still not a fan of it. I don't think many people are, unless you're into things like calligraphy. And so just being able to put it out and having it flow, this is the closest I ever got to being like a proficient pianist, because I've played piano before. By played, I mean I can play like some basic songs like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, uh, a really crappy version of Fur Elise that's not at all at the right tempo or anything. And so this was great. And so this was my introduction to computing, or at least personal computers. And, soon enough, I think by the third grade, fourth grade, we were accessing the internet. I think actually, no, for me, I feel like I definitely accessed the internet a little earlier than that, maybe first or second grade. Because I remember having, I think my very first email address was with MSN.com. I think they still have, oh, I think it's all integrated now. It's changed into like Hotmail and now Microsoft Mail. I don't know. It's changed over the years. But my first email address was at MSN.com. I was so excited. Even spam mail was exciting because as a kid, you're excited when you get mail of any sort, right? Even, no matter if it's spam, advertising, whatever. You just like someone out there in the world thought of me and sent something to me. It was delivered to my house. Like they figured out a way to get this thing to my house, and that's awesome, right? And now in the modern world, okay, maybe not so much, but back in that time, that was nuts, you know? Like for people to be able to contact and find you, that's crazy. Phone calls were special, right? So having mail and now electronic mail get to you was absolutely crazy. So, I signed up for stuff, mostly I think Harry Potter related things. I think the Harry Potter website was up and running uh, around, I think, fourth grade. So around that time, I specifically remember getting Harry Potter emails. And yeah, so my first email was with MSN. I remember, I think third, fourth grade, we were accessing things, they wanted us to be able to do basic research for like, I don't know, history reports, book reports. And so there were things, I think, yeah, Hooligan was a thing. I don't think Google was a thing quite yet. Um, yeah, but the thing was, it's hard to remember how I was searching the internet because I'm at the fifth grade. I remember Ask Jeeves was great, and there were probably others, but it was kind of a, crapshoot. It was the Wild West, and that's really what inspired me to talk about the internet and how it developed. If you think about the internet now, you think of these apps, you think of these websites and companies, and there are a few major ones and sometimes only one that occupy each niche or space, right? If you want, like Twitter has its own very thing where it's 140 characters or less, and I know they've changed that. But if you want to post something short and sweet and get the news out there, and then associate with other hashtags, you use Twitter. That's its niche, right? For video, right? It's YouTube. For pictures, and I guess now kind of video, Instagram, and before there's Flickr and all sorts of other things. Yeah, but it wasn't like that back then. It was no one knew what the next hot thing was. No one had any idea whether it's going to be a company or a person, what kind of topic or thing was going to be hot then. And businesses weren't really on board. That was the crazy thing. Like looking at how much money all these companies are making now, especially companies that are only associated with the internet or yeah, I mean just that are purely digital, like Facebook, for example. It's kind of crazy because there are all these huge businesses with all this money, and they could have reached out and expanded the businesses so much quicker, and they didn't. And so during that period of time, which is fairly long if you think about it, um, I'm not going to put any specific dates on when businesses really got into the internet scene, but from when I first got on, there weren't major companies on there, at least in the mid to late 90s, maybe. It's honestly the early 2000s where you see it more of an explosion of, let's say, I think what YouTube came out, I want to say 2005. I'm trying to do this all without any prep or looking online for cheat, for sources, which I know is bad because, it's good to have accurate information. But I'm trying to recollect this all as I remembered purely. So this is purely anecdotal, right? Everything, I'm not trying to put out a technical, specific, detailed sourced history. This is all how I remember and felt about the internet growing up. Okay, anyways, so companies weren't in on the scene yet. And, it was kind of crazy because when you had like decent looking websites, it was like, oh, okay, well, why can't they make one for like my favorite, clothing company? So I can, I don't know, at least know when they open and close. So I can know what number to call and like make an order. like it doesn't even have to be like an online ordering system, but just call them. They have someone there and they can write down your order and you go pick it up or something like that, right? And companies weren't in on that yet. A lot of companies, even major companies, didn't have websites, and it was nuts. Um, and people, it was really democratized then. And it's actually kind of crazy how much of the underlying internet is still democratized and is, at least non-centralized. And it's kind of crazy that like how little people understand that and how much that could be threatened in the future, right? You have ICANN, and then you have all these like name servers. Like these are all these agreements by non-corporations and institutions that for the most part aren't tied with any one country that have agreed these are the internet protocols, um, that dictate how traffic flows, how you can associate IP addresses. So for those who are not in the know, IP is internet protocol. And when you go places on the internet, the underlying addresses are numbers. They, in a sense, kind of tell you, where you're going. But, when we interact with the internet, for the most part, we don't interact with these numbers. We interact with, for example, google.com, right? Well, google.com, or at least back in the day before the internet got so complicated, probably had one IP address, or a few IP addresses that, if you typed, the correct IP address, you would get to google.com or one of their associated websites. If you Yeah. So it's crazy that, we interact with names, but it's really numbers underneath. But also the way that these names are tied to these numbers, um, one of the key things about finding out, oh well, what IP address is tied to which name is, your computer. Let's say you buy a computer, right? It won't automatically know which IP address is which website, right? If you buy a computer and you connect to the internet for the first time, your computer doesn't come preloaded with that knowledge. That's always changing as companies acquire or people acquire IP addresses or change them. And so what it does as it reaches out to the internet is it has to ask. It has to ask, hey, where do I find google.com? Where do I find amazon.com, right? And there are these things called name servers, which are dedicated to providing this information. And so there are countless, I mean, I'm sure there's a count, but there are tons of name servers out there, that give this information and share this information to other name servers even. Um, and it's crazy that, the protocols, for deciding how this works, is not paid. It's not, as far as I know, and it's not centralized. Um, it's just, they set up a protocol so that there would be this trusted system so that, you wouldn't get screwed over. Anyways, so ranting about that, it's just cool that the internet started in such a way, um, and is still largely, to some extent, still not corporatized in a sense. Yeah. So I just like thinking about trying to collect my thoughts and my emotions here. Anyway, so growing up, and then finally with the explosion, I would say around like high school, at least my time in high school, there were some explosions. Like YouTube got on the scene, and then before that, Google had blown up as the dominant search engine, and Yahoo, had previously been like a really strong company. And if you look at them now, it, at least in terms of the public awareness, no one talks about Yahoo anymore, right? There aren't any Yahoo commercials anymore. As far as I know, no one in the United States uses them for a search engine. They still have their niches, but in terms of, you know, the the mainstream and the culture in the mainstream, they're out of it, which is kind of nuts. So yeah, early 2000s, Google takes over, um, and it's kind of sad to see where they are now because when you know, they took to the mainstream by force. It was such a cool thing to see. All of their interfaces were very sleek, streamlined, and they were starting to build that interconnectivity between their different applications and things. And it was so cool. Like Gmail, it was Gmail and Facebook. in the early mid 2000s was such a cool thing because you had to get invited pretty much to get in there. Facebook starting out, right? Started, especially if you've seen The Social Network, you would know that it started out in colleges and only in elite colleges, which later branched out to other colleges and then later to kind of everyone. But you had to get invited. And same thing with Facebook. Google and Facebook both had these very sleek, clean interfaces. And they're both seen as harder to hack. I definitely felt like I got hacked less trying to log into those. So, for example, MySpace, another social media website, was particularly easy to hack. They had a lot of ads and things that were posing as login screens that were really just, attempts to fish for your password. So MySpace, as exciting as that was not very good as an overall product. Along comes Facebook, along comes Google, and they have these sleek interfaces. So actually, sorry, I should split this topic into Google, Gmail, and Facebook. And let's do it in roughly chronological order. So Google, the issue with search engines before Google came along was that it was kind of a shit show as to one, the quality of what you were getting, and two, what kind of sites you were getting. Google was finally figuring out they weren't doing your search queries and coming back with results that were based on alphabetical order. They were finally running algorithms so that ones that were more popular and more likely to keep appeal, right, keep people coming back, and then later more official sources were the ones that came up top. And so that's how gradually you got the Google that you have today. And it's not perfect, but typically when you search something on Google, you get what you want because you are getting typically more official sources, more mainstream businesses with what you've got. It's catered to the average person. And when you cater to the mainstream, you get the mainstream attention, you get the mainstream money. And so, yeah, Google really did a great job with that one. It's kind of crazy, that we had all those crappy search engines, and now Google is so synonymous with searching online that to look for or query something online is essentially to Google something now. Okay, so apologies for the scattered thoughts, but on to Gmail and Facebook. So both were, very kind of, elite and prestigious, hard to get into. You had to get invited, clean, sleek interfaces. They were cleaning things up, right? With Facebook being harder to hack, fewer ads, or no ads, especially at the beginning, if I remember correctly. And Gmail, oh my God, Gmail was so good at getting, and it still is really, at filtering out spam. Because at least for my MSN and later Yahoo emails, I got so much spam. It wasn't like the worst, but it was significant enough that it was becoming a problem that I was getting spam in my inbox. And for, those of you who are suckers, sorry to say that, but, you know, you're likely to click on these spam, phishing, virus emails. And especially back then, it was such a problem because the education wasn't there. It wasn't very well known as to how people were going to get you with emails, right? Would opening the email get you hacked? Did you have to click on the link? Like, what's the deal here? A lot of people weren't in the know-how, and it makes sense. But actually, now it's still just as bad because people just kind of assume that you'll be protected by the software. But back then, not only was the software not as good, the education and the consciousness wasn't in on like Trojan horses and stuff like that. And so Gmail comes along and their spam filter is great. The interface looks great. And yeah, so early mid 2000s, I want to say Gmail and Facebook are really iconic for me. But kind of backtracking now, I'm thinking about these people that, I just insulted. Sorry to call you all out. Um, but it's kind of interesting that actually, as dumb as you figure people would have been on the internet back in those days, it was interesting that because there were fewer protections, um, and it was hard to figure out how to get on the internet, how to use it, where to go, my interactions with the internet in my earlier days, so, particularly late 90s to early 2000s, I would consider most of my early interactions with the internet as like a kid, teenager. And my impression of the internet back then was that people were fairly smart. And, there were trolls and people who would flame, but the dialogue was pretty solid. Obviously, not all the time, but it felt like people had a fairly reasonable, or they formed a fairly reasonable community and an atmosphere where if you were being stupid and mean, usually you would get filtered out, right? You'd get reported, you get banned, people would be against you in terms of opinion. Or even if you had a wrong opinion, you'd have to logic it out. And it feels now, especially as we talk about misinformation in, the late 2010s, early 2020s, it's kind of crazy, and I don't think it's acknowledged enough just how bad it is. Whether it comes from corporate shills, comes from bots, come from people who are like legitimate people who are actually just misinformed, echo chambers of people, all with the same opinions. There are a lot of those. I guess regardless of how they form, there are a lot of echo chambers out there, and echo chambers that don't have any sense of logic or backing to them. It's very frequent that I will stumble onto, I don't know, Facebook comment section, YouTube comment section, Reddit discussions, like whatever, filled with people that I just can't believe that the prevailing opinion is so, one, that it's wrong, and two, that it's backed by nothing whatsoever, and it's filled by all this speculation, um, and everyone else just kind of takes it at face value. And I think at this point, there's one thing I kind of want to rant about. Sorry, kind of a small deviation. Whenever I see things like, oh, it doesn't matter if it's upvoted, liked, blah, 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 it's just fake internet points, I really hate that opinion. And here's why. If you, especially if you're new to the internet, if you were to wander onto, like, I don't know, a Twitter post, right? And it's got a lot of attention. It's got a lot of comments. It's got a lot of hearts. I actually don't know what they're called. I don't use Twitter a lot. I don't use Twitter a lot, so I don't know what the hearts are called. Likes, maybe. Um, if you see that, right, are you gonna think that that's a bad opinion, right? Just based off of that. Let's say it's on a topic that you have no knowledge of, or are you gonna trust the opinion of a different post and it doesn't have nearly as many, likes, doesn't have comments, there's not a lot of engagement with that post? Who are you going to trust if you have no knowledge of the subject beforehand? For a lot of people, they're going to trust that one that does have a lot of engagement. And so when I see like, or and actually on Reddit, right, if you upvote something, it's going to make it to the front page. And let's say even if it's not on the front page, it's within like a subsection of Reddit, like subreddits. Um, Things get upvoted, you're gonna think that that might be the right opinion, because everyone else seems to think so. And so it's not just that these people get points; it's that their opinion becomes more heard, it becomes more important, and it's also going to be seen as more correct by people who don't know any better. So when people say like these things don't matter, it very much does matter. It dictates what gets shown to you. Otherwise, if these things wouldn't matter, you wouldn't have issues with bots and corporate shills and all these people trying to artificially upvote things that shouldn't be upvoted or posted. So, anyways, just a little thing I'm really mad about. I guess it's not so little if I'm really mad about it, right? Okay, just got to get that out of my system. Oh, now I'm totally lost. Not really, but it's only like 24 minutes in, and I'm kind of spinning as to where I left off. You can't really listen back on what you were saying before, so that's always kind of a problem. That would be cool though, if they invented something that, you could visualize all the words, transcribed as real time as you said them, and you could scroll back and see what you're talking about. All right, anyways, Right. So I was talking about like people being stupid online, especially in my earlier times. And now I feel it seems like there are a lot of, you know, opinions out there that can just get thrown or posts that can just get posted, to generate outrage or sadness or whatever emotion. And people don't fact check it and it gets upvoted all the way up. And it's kind of crazy. It's like, how the fuck did you guys not check it? It's just, people will try to they'll like things that kind of back what their opinions are, right? If you're angry at political party this, or if you're angry at this religion, right? You see something that validates your opinions, boom, don't even check. Makes you feel good, makes you feel right. Look at all these other people that agree with you, boom, you upvote it. You don't check it. And that's just a really common thing to see these days. It's really, really bad. And kind of going off on another thing that makes me mad, I'll try not to let this get too out of hand, is people not taking responsibility. So another common, mindset I see is like, oh, you guys all make it seem like we are all like one opinion, and they say this sarcastically. It's like, oh, you never thought like, oh, Reddit or YouTube or Twitter is composed of many different like people with different opinions, blah 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 blah. Well, guess what? If you were so varied, why is the prevailing opinion on a lot of these different websites, why does it always end up being the same sort of opinion, right? You may, as a whole, each be composed of individuals who are different, but you can't, make your like voice heard and then not take responsibility for it because, oh, that the voice that is being heard, right, through this series of posts and comments is a whole bunch of people. You are one of those people. This is the same sort of mindset as, oh, fuck, I'm stuck in traffic. No, motherfucker, you were part of traffic, okay? There's no avoiding part of that responsibility. You are part of the problem. So, if you want to take credit, right, upvotes, karma, whatever, if you want to like be seen as someone important in the community and you're happy when everyone else shares the same like opinion as you all also have to take responsibility when you fuck up, like with the Boston bomber and Reddit, right? um they were like, oh, we're gonna look into this and we're gonna like troll this motherfucker. He's the guy who caused the Boston bombing. Turns out it wasn't. He had been dead for days before the Boston bombing. uh and then they were like, oh, fuck, it wasn't us, like we were just looking into it. Well, guess what? You spurred on a whole bunch of shit. There were death threats made to the dude's family, right? You have to take responsibility. You can't just be like, oh, okay, well, that wasn't us. So as a Redditor, I am ashamed. I didn't do that thing, but that's going to be a mark on Reddit and the community forever. So, you can't just take credit, when it's out there for the taking and then avoid all responsibility. A community lives and dies together. Okay, rant done for that part. Okay, so back onto the timeline. So I've talked about late 90s, early 2000s a bit. Okay. So let's see. Going even into the mid late 90s. So before I went to, sorry, not 90s, but 2000s. So before I went to college, YouTube still wasn't that corporatized yet. You didn't have things like Vivo, which was like dominating music. You still had things that were, you had like YouTubers, right, that are building brands that had a cult following or maybe even beyond a cult following, especially, like Smosh, Nigahiga, right? But for the large part, there was still, if you went to the YouTube front page, you could still see a lot of shit that you weren't expecting, You could go and there would be like something that would be hot and you have no idea why it was hot and what the fuck happened. And it was truly like meme culture, right? The beauty of memes is, at least for as far as I know, right? There could be a whole underlying conspiracy, but as far as I know, memes become popular for no good reason. If you look at, if you ever talk to the originators, a lot of these memes, or at least the people involved in them, um, it was just some sort of random ordinary day thing that they were doing, like they're filming some sort of like interview or taking a picture, and you know, it's not popular right away usually. And there are like a lot of pictures, and then it gets taken out of context and it gets reused and transformed in a different context, and people realize, oh my god, that's perfect. It's perfect for that situation. And then it just catches like wildfire. And you can try to force a meme, but if you look at the origins of all these memes, it's almost always, largely unintended. And that's the beauty of them, right? They're not, corporate and trying to pander to your needs. They didn't do market research into like what the masses want. It was just a perfect sublime moment that just happened to work out for what, the vibe of the internet was at the time. And that was, still true on the YouTube front page and just across the internet as a whole, going, into the mid 2000s. And I don't think I personally, anyways, really saw the full like domestication and corporatization of, websites like YouTube until my college years. So, um, late 2000s, early 2010s. And so the 2010s for me, in terms of the internet, at least in terms of culture, has really, really been frustrating because it's so less spicy than it used to be. It's less wild. And for those people who grew up during these times, I feel really bad for them because it's like if you grew up only knowing animals in the zoo, if you've ever been to the zoo, you'll know that a lot of it's not very exciting, You have animals that are just kind of sitting there or sleeping. Sometimes they're not even there because they're like in the inside part of the zoo. Um, it's not how animals were meant to live, and it's all controlled by a greater being that, organization that really just wants attention, that wants money. And I'm not saying zoos are all bad. A lot of that does help fund conservation efforts and whatnot. But just purely in terms of the experience of you interacting with animals or getting to see what animals are like, that's that's kind of what the internet is now, especially in terms of media, right? Like YouTube, Instagram, blah, blah. It's all curated. It's all market researched. On the other hand, yeah, back then, if you want to look at what the internet was back then, it was the wild, and it was a weird sort of wild. You had like, I don't know, if you want to continue with this analogy, people making whack ass hybrid species, people randomly diving into like unknown waters, and not all of them made it back. And some people came back as like mermaids or something. I don't know. No one fucking knew what was going to happen. It was great. That said, so I'm kind of, championing the 2000s of the internet and kind of ragging on the 2010s. But I'm not going to say that the 2010s were all bad. In terms of, like popularization of crypto, um, to the businesses finally really integrating with the internet, which has led to a lot of conveniences, a lot of standards and safety practices. So there has been a lot of good in that. There's a lot more fact checking, there's a lot more laws in place, and even if that's some of the laws are bad, just the fact that we have a more rigorous system and focus on these laws on the internet has been really good. And just, yeah, to have everyone on board the internet is, I don't know about everyone else, but I feel like all the early pioneers of the internet were kind of hoping for everyone to get on board. It was a party that they were hoping everyone to join, and it took long enough. It took like 20 years or so, but it kind of finally happened, right? Um, it's hard to get to any part of the world that could have the internet, but doesn't. Typically, it's either an economic issue where they are too poor for it, or by choice, right? The isolationists, the Amish who refuse any technology past a certain year. So I will say there have been some benefits to the internet after 2010. Um, Trying to think. Online gaming. Sorry, this is not really in order. Online gaming has been a big part of my life, for better or worse. But it's been a big part of forming online communities. It's interesting to looking back on early online communities where you would talk and it was all like text, you know, and that part that of the internet and that time of the internet was really cool because limited by the technology of the time, people did have to get very creative, right? There weren't web calls yet, and even early on, you couldn't even do voice phone calls through the internet. Or by the time they did, right, with Skype, it was still kind of shitty at times, but it was still amazing. People appreciated it, um, and so especially early with the slow internet speeds, you had to get creative and just talk with texts, and then maybe meet up in person, which was always risky business. There's a whole discussion about that. Or if you wanted to do pictures back then, you got creative. There's a thing called ASCII to Art. That's spelled ASCII. Um, I always forget what it means. American, no. Signal. I'm not gonna embarrass myself. I've already embarrassed myself enough. Anyways, it was there's like a code for each different kind of character that you can do through text, and through different like characters and symbols, people could generate all sorts of cool art. Um, and it was just kind of representative of how people had to be very creative about using the internet back then. Um, and it was interesting that internet communities were all just internet. So to meet up in person was a very rare, special, and I didn't do it. It was a special sort of thing back then, and so it's crazy how that's evolved over the years, to what it is now, where you don't ever have to meet in person. You could voice call them, you can send pictures, you can send videos, you can voice chat, you can play games together, you can work together through like Slack, Teams, Discord, um, like screen sharing, like TeamViewer, whatever. It's just crazy how that has evolved, so that you have so much more choice in how you want to interact with people on the internet, in person or not. But the not in person part, that's gotten a lot more interactive. It's developed a lot of depth to it. I think I'm trying to decide if this is a good stopping point, if that's kind of covered all I wanted to talk about in terms of the internet so far. Obviously, there's way more to. There's literally you could talk forever about the internet, protocols, different websites, applications, how it all works, Wi-Fi versus Ethernet. I don't know, but like you know, TikTok culture. I don't know. But I think I'm going to leave it at that. I'm just double checking that there isn't anything specific that is just generally internet related. I think that's about it for now, unfortunately. Kind of exhausted the creative energy reservoir. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. And I think that's enough, to be honest. Fuck, if anyone's listening to this, it's 38 minutes and almost 40 seconds into this. And yeah, damn, dude. You've listened to a lot more of me than I listen to myself. So, anyways, go out and have a good week. And to anyone who grew up before the internet, I hope this has been kind of a trip back. I guess I got a shout out to the dial up sound and having to make sure no one was on the phone when you used the internet, and AIM having limited messages on its chat. I don't know. But to anyone who grew up after the internet, I just want to say I hope you appreciate, the internet and all its usefulness, but also to recognize how difficult it was, but also how cool it was, before the internet, how it forced people to get creative. And don't let that die. This is actually for everyone. Just because you have these convenient tools at your hand does not mean that you can't do more, um, by thinking and acting beyond the bounds of, what the internet and its various tools have created. There's more to the world, and what you can do beyond those things. So, anyways, that's it for Monday/Tuesday, and I will see you guys on Wednesday. Bye.